giant scorpions and man-eating crocodiles.
Hello, I'm Dr. Lawrence Lancaster, and welcome to the first episode of Please Remember to Edit This Line Once We Think of a Title. Episode 1. A brief history of early computer games. The very first computer game was designed by Hungarian inventor Wolfgang von Kempelen. Released in 1769 and tentatively titled The Turk, it took the form of a large mechanical chessboard complete with full-size Turkish android. While in some ways this was a step backward, as it lacked the multiplayer option typically bundled with previous versions of chess, it still enjoyed praise from numerous critics for both its challenging difficulty and casual racism. However, it was later claimed by Kempelen's detractors that his computer game did not in fact contain a computer at all, but rather a
little person.
Kempelen dismissed these accusations as preposterous, adding that everyone knows those little buggers are rubbish at chess. His words a cruel reminder of a shameful era in human history, in stark contrast to these more progressive times, when thankfully it's now widely accepted that the clinically diminutive can play board games almost as well as real people. Regardless, the controversy did irreparable damage to Kempelen's credibility, and by extension the emerging medium of computer games, to such a degree that the bottom fell out of the frankly already non-existent market, and no new computer games were developed for almost 2 centuries. Fortunately for all of us, that dry spell was eventually broken in 1958 by American physicist William Higginbotham, who, dissatisfied with wasting his potential on the trivial quack science of nuclear physics, opted instead to develop a brand new computer game. He called his creation Tennis for Two, and though the art direction was admittedly subpar when compared to the Turk, critics lauded the addictive gameplay and commendable absence of dwarven trickery. The sudden and unexpected success of Higginbotham's magnum opus led to widespread public interest in computer games, and as other aspiring developers followed in his footsteps, the following decades saw the release of many exciting and genre-defining titles, such as the zero-gravity dogfighting of Space War, the mind-bending logic puzzles of Colossal Cave Adventure, the tabletop-inspired dungeon crawling of Rogue, and another tennis game. Regrettably, as an unfortunate byproduct of mainstream success, many of the common folk began to refer to computer games as video games, a term that is clearly inferior, objectively incorrect, and used exclusively by dysgenic peasants. Suffice to say, I will not tolerate its utterance in the comments section of my videos. The increasing popularity of computer games led to the rise of a wonderful new invention called the home console, and by far the most successful of these was the Atari 2600, no doubt due to its cutting-edge, hyper-realistic graphics. The mainstay appeal of the 2600 was, of course, home console versions of games previously available only in arcade cabinets. Finally, for a reasonable price, roughly equivalent to that of a slightly used Ford Escort, the ordinary working man could purchase his very own arcade port that had been programmed in 3 weeks by an overworked intern, and henceforth and forevermore he would own an inferior copy of a game he could have played at a local pub for 10 pence. For reasons unknown, this business model proved unsustainable, eventually resulting in another crash of the computer game market. At the time, many placed the blame firmly on Atari's adaptation of the hit film E.T. the Extraterrestrial, though in hindsight that seems unlikely because I've played that game and it's really quite good. Regardless of the true culprit, so catastrophic was the crash of 1983 that countless copies of E.T., along with other Atari games and peripherals, were unceremoniously discarded into landfill in the deserts of New Mexico. Rumors of this event circulated for more than 30 years, and were often dismissed merely as urban legend. That is, until the site could finally be excavated in 2014, thanks to a new invention called the shovel. In the wake of the computer game crash of 1983, industry revenue dropped a staggering 97%, and the very existence of the medium teetered on the verge of oblivion for 2 full years. That is, until the proud nation of Japan, eager to enact revenge on the United States for their callous use of nuclear weapons, devised a psychological warfare operation which endeavored to warp subsequent generations of American males into effeminate man-children. And the secret weapon behind this merciless campaign of mass emasculation would be none other than the Nintendo Entertainment System. In order to distinguish themselves from their Atari predecessors, Nintendo employed a bold new strategy of making games that weren't completely terrible. It was a wild gamble, to be sure, but ultimately it paid dividends, as the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES for short, put gaming back on the map once and for all. Suddenly it seemed as though the entire world were all at once ravaged by a severe case of what media pundits were calling Nintendo fever, a condition which, much like my sister's fibromyalgia, probably doesn't exist. Alas, with the Nintendo Entertainment System crowned the new king of consoles, it was only a matter of time before pretenders to the throne emerged. Or in this particular case, not so much a matter of time at all, as the Sega Master System was released on the same day. In stark contrast to Nintendo's family-friendly image, Sega took a more punk rock approach to their marketing, heavily implying that their main competitor's hardware was little more than a glorified toy for toddlers, while bragging that Sega can do what Nintendo don't. Unfortunately for Sega, while their boasts were demonstrably true from a technical standpoint, this turned out to be irrelevant to everyone who wasn't a nerd. As such, Sega were unable to deliver a knockout blow to Nintendo, and so began the console war. Reliable fatality figures for the console war are difficult to come by, but rough estimates put it at somewhere between 0 and 15 million. If we were to assume a worst-case scenario, and for the sake of the algorithm we absolutely should, then historically speaking the console war would be ranked 8th in terms of death toll, right between the conquests of Timur and the An Lushan Rebellion. Well short of the podium, but a solid effort nonetheless. And so it was that these two behemoths duked it out mano a mano for a full decade before a third contender finally entered the fray in the form of Sony's PlayStation, turning the console war into a free-for-all not unlike that of the Three Kingdoms, which incidentally holds the bronze medal for death toll and thus makes for a far more interesting story than this one. Skipping ahead for the sake of sanity, Sega lost, ultimately pulling out of the console market entirely after the failure of the Dreamcast. Nintendo won, and is still winning to this day. Sony has made 5 PlayStations to date, seemingly not just in terms of iterations, but also actual production numbers, as anyone who tried to purchase their latest effort upon release can attest. Microsoft even showed up at some point with their own eyesore of a console. And believe it or not, in these wild and wacky times, an increasing number of people even play computer games on actual computers, typically as an alternative to things like sexual intercourse or seeking gainful employment. Anyway, that's all for now. If you enjoyed this video, there's a like button. If you'd like to watch similar videos in the future, there's a subscribe button. Also, there's a bell icon, but to be quite honest with you, I'm not entirely sure what it does. Goodbye.